Hello and welcome to UK Property Accountants. My name is Chirag, an analyst here at UKPA. Joining me today, we have one of our experts, a senior associate in our tax team, Prasun. This is the second part of the video series where we talk about VAT on property. In the last video, we talked about VAT implications on residential property. Today, we're taking a look at VAT implications on commercial properties. Welcome back, Prasun.
Hi, thank you again.
Prasun, last time we talked about VAT implications on residential properties and you ended on commercial properties. Why don't you start with explaining what exactly VAT implications on commercial properties are?
Yeah, sure, Chirag. So, like residential property transaction, commercial property transaction is also VAT exempted. So, any of the renting of the commercial property or trading of the commercial property is exempted from VAT. However, there is a caveat when dealing with commercial property, and that caveat is option to tax. So, when a property is opted to tax, commercial property is opted to tax, then the VAT should be charged whenever the property is either rented or is being sold.
Could you please further elaborate on option to tax for us?
So, when a property is opted to tax, the landlord or the property trader, commercial property trader, should charge 20% VAT on it. So, if a commercial property is rented out to the tenant and if that commercial property is opted to tax, the landlord should charge 20% VAT to the tenant. And likewise, when a property trader, a commercial property trader has opted to tax on the property, commercial property, then at the time of selling, 20% VAT has to be charged. The reason for option to tax is basically for the purpose of claiming back the VAT that was paid at the time of acquisition of the commercial property. So if I am a property trader and if I have acquired a commercial property where I have paid VAT to my seller, then just to claim back that input VAT, I would also opt for VAT. And when I'm opt to tax basically, and when I'm selling it, then I would also be charging VAT to my buyer. So that's how I can claim back the VAT that I have paid to my seller basically.
You just mentioned how VAT is applicable for any transaction where option to tax is available. Is it true for all situations that VAT becomes applicable?
Chirag, when there is option to tax on commercial property, like I've mentioned, renting of that commercial property or selling of that commercial property, there will be a VAT implication because option to tax has been applied on that commercial property. However, there is a situation where even if there is an option to tax applied on the commercial property, there will not be any VAT implication. When there is a transfer of the business as a whole, and if that transaction is considered as transfer of going concern, then in that situation, even if the commercial property is transferred where option to tax is applied on it, VAT will not be charged on that transaction.
Prasun, you just mentioned something called transfer of going concern. Could you please elaborate on that for us?
Transfer of going concern is primarily a transaction where there is a transfer of business. So how this concept comes into play when dealing with commercial property is if I have a commercial property and I'm carrying out a business of a renting as a commercial property, or I use a commercial property for my business, and if I intend to sell my business as a whole to a potential buyer, not just a commercial property, then if there is a situation where my transfer is considered as a transfer of a business overall, then in that situation all the transfer of my asset would be outside the scope of VAT, so that the commercial property where there is already option to tax, like you've mentioned earlier, there won't be any VAT implication on it. However, there are few conditions that needs to be fulfilled when checking whether the transaction is considered as a transfer of going concern. One of the main condition being is that if I am selling my business where that includes a commercial property, buyers should also could potentially use that business or use that property in the same way as I was previously using it. So that is one of the main condition. And another condition being the buyer should either be VAT registered or should be VAT registered after the transfer of my business. And at the same time, the property in which I have applied for option to tax, the buyer should also apply for option to tax. So just to summarize, there will simply be a change in the owner of the property, owner of the business in actually. So when there is a change in owner of the business, so this transaction is considered as transfer of going concern, and there will not be any VAT implication, even if it includes a commercial property there where there is option to tax.
Thank you so much for such an insightful session, Prasun. I'm sure there were tons of takeaways for our viewers. If you're dealing with or planning to deal with a transaction of a property and are stuck about the VAT implications, don't hesitate to contact us. We even offer a free 15-minute discovery call where we will answer your questions and tell you of the services that best suit your needs. Thank you and have a great day ahead.